Brought to you by the Minority Media Association and the Broadcasting Club at UWM, celebrating diversity in your area.
Bringing my community to you.
Identifying issues that are important to everyone. Embracing individuality.
Welcome to the U-View.
Hello and welcome to the U-View, presented by the Broadcast Club and the Minority Media Association at UWM, right here on Pause TV 3. I'm Ariel, a member of the MMA. Today I'll be speaking to Derrick Jackson, UWM alumnus and nationally known Boston Globe columnist. Jackson has won multiple awards for his writing and photography. This week he'll be receiving one more, the UWM Alumni Award. He's here today to tell us about his successful journalism career and explain his take on journalism and education today. All right, so I'll start by asking you, how did you first get involved in journalism?
Oh, as I often say, I've been doing journalism since middle school. I wrote for my 8th grade newspaper at John Muir Junior High in Milwaukee, and I liked it. I was a sports writer, and it was a minor conflict of interest because even though I actually was pretty terrible at basketball, I was on the in our intramural championship team that played another junior high, and I was a starting guard, and I only scored 6 points. But let me tell you something, they were the most gloriously written 6 points ever in a junior high school newspaper. And I loved it ever since. I worked for the Milwaukee Star and Courier, the African American weeklies. I was able to do sports and news, and that gave me so much experience right away as a teenager that as a freshman here at UWM, I was hired by our professor, my 101 professor, who happened to be the late Harry Hill, assistant managing editor of the Milwaukee Journal. And though in those days, your very first assignment was writing your own obituary. And as I like to say, I did myself in so well that by October I was working as a high school sports writer at the Milwaukee Journal while I was attending UWM. So, which I hope that, I don't want to give anybody any bright ideas about school, but UWM, I spent at least as much time at the Journal as I did at UWM. And on one hand, I had no social life outside of that, but between the opportunities provided by UWM, I had a terrific photography professor here, Ron Overdahl, that helped nurture my photography side. And between that and the Journal, I felt like I was a working class kid in a candy store.
Excellent. Now, did you face any difficulties being a working class student? Your parents were both factory workers, and also being African American, that other students may not have faced?
You know, it's funny. I look back and I realize I lived in some kind of perfect bubble, because it was at the sort of it was the lesser seen part of the civil rights movement. My parents never marched or anything like that. They just worked hard, and they provided this really fantastic model of just working hard. There was enough progress had been made that they themselves didn't have a college education, but they never let me think for a minute that college was not an option. I mean, I was going to college, and by extension, when I got into journalism, there was no option for failure. My parents just set up this idea that there's no option for failure. So when I found my calling, which really feels like journalism was, I just went for it. And whether it was sports photography at high school games in the city conference, the old city conference, or lucking out, and as a teenager I was on the floor of the old Milwaukee Arena taking photographs of the Milwaukee Bucks when they still had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Oscar Robertson. Again, it was those opportunities. You can't help but say, this is a really cool profession. But I will say, that's the fun part, but the most serious reason I got into journalism was when I was in high school at John Marshall High. And I wrote frankly, two pedestrian book reviews on the autobiography of Malcolm X. And I thought I was doing it kind of as a service to explain Malcolm X to a predominantly white high school. And I got called to the vice principal's office. And the vice principal shut the door and started like literally berating me for many minutes. He says, you know, your columns on Malcolm X are very divisive. They're tearing the school apart. You know, you're writing about a really controversial and negative figure, and I'm just listening to him go. And then this is about 20 minutes of this, and then finally, I don't know where this came from, but I finally said, Mr. Vice Principal, may I ask you a question? He said, yeah, go ahead. I said, do you believe in freedom of speech? And he went, well, yeah, okay, yeah, sure, okay, yeah, sure, okay, okay, just go, just leave, just get out of here, just don't write any more of those columns again. And when I left and I was in the hallway, I realized, wow, I had the power because of journalism, writing. There's an old cliche, the pen is mightier than the sword, and I learned it right then and there. I froze the vice principal, and so I realized I had stumbled onto something that was a really powerful tool of life.
And so that kind of fueled your desire to pursue journalism. And you did say yesterday in front of a room full of journalism students that people are very candid with their ignorance, and you're able to, you don't need to put your emotion into things. You can just let the story speak for itself.
Sure, yeah. There was a student who asked about, you know, when you feel very passionate about a topic or subject, and then you go out and interview and do a story on it, how do you keep your emotions from interfering with your reporting? And well, first of all, let no one make any mistakes. The greatest reporters out there are reporters with passion. And they have a passion, but it's a passion that goes beyond what I would say is pure advocacy, like just thinking your position is correct and then directing all of your energy and questions and inquiry and research into making sure that you achieve the outcome of your opinion. No, your passion drives you to talk to all sides and report all sides. And I'm speaking this as a reporter, you know, not necessarily as a columnist, because you had to be a reporter for many years before you could become a columnist. And what you do is then, if you're an effective questioner, you can get various sides to be reasonably candid, reasonably honest, you know, unless it's a public official trying to hide something. And then you put it in the paper and let the readers decide what the final story of the day is. If you've done your job as a reporter on the research, the reporting, yeah, most stories have a, shall we say, a weight of what side holds the most truth. But the power of journalism, when done right, is the reader can decide and say, did you see that story in the Milwaukee Journal? Did you see that story in the New York Times? Did you see that story in the Boston Globe where they reported that all the fish in Lake Michigan are dying, or all the you know, all the bus drivers did this or that? And then people can make up their mind what the public policy should be, what the reaction should be, what government action should be. And
now, you do a lot of photography regarding, you have a passion for birds, you take a lot of photos in other countries, advocating their environmentalist movements, and just the great things they're doing in Europe for the environment. How do you think, what do you think we can do here in Milwaukee to invest in our environment as UWM students?
Yeah, well, actually today I just had a fantastic tour of your new School of Freshwater Sciences. and some of the stuff that is going on there with aquaculture and researching the toxins in the Great Lakes are going to be really invaluable. And as I mentioned in class yesterday, you know, environmental issues, those issues of toxicity, food abundance, we have, like, so they affect everybody. They have social ramifications, who gets to eat what protein, what the cost of food is. So for instance, you have, living here in the Midwest, you're at the epicenter of a whole host of globally important environmental issues, everything from GMO corn and soybeans, where it's not just singularly the issue of whether genetically modified crops are bad for us to ingest, but also issues such as genetically modified crops that can resist pesticides but kill all other weeds that happen to be the food for monarch butterflies. Apparently there's a lot of emerging research that some of these pesticides kill honeybees, and many people don't know that that bees are the great pollinators of agriculture itself. That without bees we would not have wild blueberries, we wouldn't have a lot of fruit trees. There's a lot of things that we wouldn't have. The Midwest is part of that. The Great Lakes ecosystem, which UWM now stands to be a lead university, if not the leading university for that research. You know, the Great Lakes is one of the biggest bodies of water, continuous bodies of water in the world, and as places like the West, the South drain their water sources, guess where they might be trying to come to? Right here. So we're at the heart of a lot of stuff. So I encourage students to look at the environment. I do think that the environment is your generation's issue, because it's not just about whether we're talking about some pie-in-the-sky kind of concepts of offshore wind energy or something like that. The environment has a thread in everything. It has a thread in social inequity. It has a thread in, so, you know, it's not an accident in this country, as in pretty much anywhere else, that the worst toxic dumps happen to be in the poorest communities. So there are questions of class, racism, all that kind of stuff that all comes into one. So it's an issue that if you dive into it with any depth at all, you end up with elements. I mean, there's places where bike lanes, such as Portland, Oregon, there's been big debates that have ended up being debates over racism as to whether putting bike lanes in African American communities disrupts the culture and the business flow of those communities. So it's just, I think it's really an exciting time to be exploring those issues, and I think it's also an exciting time because we're really understanding how interconnected. When you say something is an environmental issue, it's much more than that. When you say something is an issue of economic justice, it's much more than that. They're all part of the same thing.
Definitely. Well, it's time to take a short break. When we come back, we'll learn more about Derrick Jackson's experience in journalism and his advice for today's college students.
This is where powerful ideas lead to proven results. This is where you belong.
A strong, productive workforce. Building one requires proper education and training. not just for today, but for tomorrow. That's why for the last 100 years, thousands of successful workers wearing hats like these began their careers with this one hat.
Welcome back to the U-View. Our guest today is Derrick Jackson. He's a UWM graduate as well as an award-winning columnist and photographer. He's here to give us his view on journalism and education today. So I'll continue by asking, you have a history of writing about sports here at UWM and outside of UWM. You've written about all sorts of sports, including March Madness, but you tend to take a look beyond the sport and look at the retention rates of the students who play those sports. What have your findings said thus far?
Well, for many years now, closing in, I think, about 16 years now, I've done something what I call the graduation rate gap. Graduation gap bowl for the football season. And I do this, a similar thing for March Madness, is where I take the teams that have made the bowl games or in basketball make the NCAA tournament. And I take they're obviously seeded by who's the best. I take those seedings and I rearrange them by the graduation rates of their players. And I tend to do it by the black graduation rates because black players are vastly overrepresented in both major college football and major in basketball. I mean, black people are 13% of the population in the United States, but we're like, 60% of the collegiate basketball, scholarship collegiate basketball players, and about the same in football. So I think that black players are the canary in the coal mine of whether the system is really working or not. And what I've tended to find over the years is that a somewhat inverse relationship between the graduation rates and how good the team is. So the better the team, the worse often the graduation rates. And I'm actually been quite pleased over the years that a lot of people have paid attention to it, that the demand that I put this in the paper every March Madness and every bowl season. I've had some colleges say that I've become part of their public relations because if they've had really good, they'll put in, according to this, we have these are good graduation rates. And so it's a fascinating look as big-time college sports becomes bigger and bigger every year, with the coaches making the same as if they were in the NBA and the NFL, the universities collecting money as if they were an NFL or NBA franchise, and yet these players who once upon a time their benefit of having a scholarship might have meant something, if they graduated, but now the level of exploitation of where so many kids don't graduate, and yet but the stakes are higher and higher for them to succeed, and the level at which it's very, very clear that at too many of these schools, your purpose on this campus is not to go to school. Your purpose is to win for the alma mater. So sports is particularly, I think, big-time college sports is, in many ways, is heading to a pretty tipping point. Even as we speak, several college players or past college players have filed lawsuits with the NCAA, to create basically a payment system. So I think you're going to see a pretty interesting time coming in the next few years. My attention to the graduation rates is simply that it's an attempt to hold universities accountable for what is more and more becoming a hypocritical kind of mission of the, quote, student athlete, that there's way too much hypocrisy, and it's a system that needs major changing. If not, in some cases, there's growing calls for schools, the top schools, to have to abandon this whole illusion.
So do you think those schools are almost doing a disservice to those students and maybe using them?
Oh, sure. And especially as we're finding out more and more about, and particularly football, with the concussion issue. I mean, many of these players are literally giving themselves brain injuries for the college, and I mean, that's an issue that hasn't even really reared its ugly head in terms of players demanding more. So people ask me why I even started it and why I do it. It's because it's billions of dollars of industry in which the college says they're doing something. The evidence is abundant that too many colleges are not doing it, and it's also one of the top sources of visibility for black males. And if black males with this level of visibility are not getting a fair shake, then where else are they getting a fair shake?
Excellent. And what do you think are, outside of sports, the primary reasons for a school like UWM or another university to have such low retention rates for African Americans?
It's a chronic national problem for big public urban institutions. The same is true for like Cleveland State, Wayne State, Illinois, and the urban Chicago schools. I mean, it's actually a good day when you have urban institutions that are between 30% and 50% graduation rates. Now, two major factors, I think. One is the state of our public schools nationally. For all that people say, for all that politicians say that education is the top issue of the day, the reality is we don't invest in it. There's no real national plan. There's no, because of the way schools are funded, the federal government only contributes an infinitesimal amount toward education. The state, so it falls on the states and the cities. And cities, of course, have many cities have terrible tax bases because they have a disproportionate share of low-income people who can't afford houses, or their houses are devalued because they live in low-income neighborhoods. So you have a whole financial system of funding public schools that just is it's an abject failure in comparison to other nations, particularly like in North Europe, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, that choose to fund their schools through a state organized level of planning. And sometimes people ask me, well, it's easy for those Northern European countries to do all that funding because it's a homogeneous population. Well, they haven't traveled to Northern Europe lately. With the North Africans, with Eastern Europeans, it's really a far more diverse place, and they just made a commitment to a more national commitment to educate the kids. So that's number one. The second is that big urban institutions, state institutions, have to do a better job all across the board, not just UWM, but they have to, across the board, have to do a better job of recognizing what populations they're serving and do an extra mile to support them and make sure that there are, whether it's remedial stuff or whether it's guidance, work guidance stuff, career guidance stuff to help you have a focus, a target, a goal. We just have to do a better job at that. And again, some people might whine that, well, we can't get money from the state or we can't get money from these sources. Well, I think universities are going to have to get more creative, especially when kind of elite universities are able to skim the cream of the crop with scholarships and stuff. Yes, urban universities service a more difficult population, but it's not an impossible task to have kids. I was very lucky when I was at UWM. I had professors that expected excellence, and there was, again, almost like my parents in a way. There was just sort of there's no expectation of you failing.
So a good support system.
Exactly.
Excellent. Now, Jamal Abdul Alim, who's also an alumnus
Yeah,
of
no,
UWM,
yes.
he wrote in Washington Monthly that UWM has a African American retention rate of 19%. What does this make you feel or think in regards to UWM specifically?
Well,
What aren't we doing?
Well, I don't live here on a daily basis, so I can't speak that to directly. What I do know from a much larger kind of look at education. So, for instance, in where I work at the Boston Globe, across the street is the University of Massachusetts at Boston, which is literally Massachusetts' version of UWM, and it has a very similar kind of second school relationship to UMass Amherst as UWM does to Madison. And there, if my mind is correct, the graduation rate for black students there is in the 30%. And so why is that much more than UWM? Well, they're very fortunate in that they have an African American chancellor who had specialized when he was at Northeastern University running a major support system for black students at an institute at Northeastern University. This may be a little obscure for a Milwaukee audience, but the point is that in very broad terms, it takes chancellors, it takes presidents that have a commitment, who then make sure that the message goes down the chain of command. Again, sorry to repeat this, but the chain of command has to understand there's no failure allowed here. There's many schools of thought that one of the failures of education, whether K through college, is that too many professors, too many people look at a certain person from a certain background and assume there's a part of them they can't learn, whether it's a segmented kind of thing like maybe black kids can't know math, or to more broad things like he or she comes from a very poverty-stricken background and there's not a chance for them to, you know, achieve anything great, maybe something good but not great. Well, the message has to go down that you can do something not just good, you can do something great. Let's just figure out what it is.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's all we have time for today. A special thank you to Derrick Jackson for speaking with us, and thank you,
Ariel.
No problem. And thank you for watching this installment of UView. You can catch our campus channel at Pause TV, TV3. You can also watch all of our shows online or learn more about the UView and Broadcast Club at uwm@pausetv3.com. Until next time, I'm Ariel Vaccaro. Goodbye.